Good. Yeah. So that's it.
Of April 18th to order. We do not have any Board or Commission interviews tonight. We do have from the Library Board, Ed Scholl, who served one term, wishes to be reappointed. He is the current treasurer of the Library Board and is doing a fantastic job. And with the new executive director, at least as the liaison, I would say it's probably a good idea to reappoint.
I like that idea.
All right, fine. Well, that was easy enough. All right, in terms of reviewing the regular agenda, so there is one thing on the regular agenda, Resolution 2023-15, which is the Stormwater Master Plan funding. I'm going to recommend that we postpone that so that, given that it came in as much more expensive than we expected, to let the Sustainability and the Green Space Commission weigh in and find out how much of a priority it is that we spend money on that in this fiscal year. Does anybody have a problem with that? And I know Pam is, you can wait and report on what they've said, but I know you have said that Emily, at the next Green Space Advisory meeting, they'll talk about it a little bit.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So are we okay with that?
I'm okay with this.
Katie, all right with that?
Sure.
Marie?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then just as a placeholder to remind the, in the consent agenda is resolution, about paying down some of our pension benefits. I'd like just to at least discuss that for a minute. We don't have to pull it for a vote, but at least a few Q&As, because I think it's good information for us to know. Does anybody else have anything else on the regular agenda?
I wouldn't mind a little bit of discussion about the other thing on the consent agenda.
Okay.
Just to talk about what that process is like for the sponsorship policy and events. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but I just think it'd be helpful. But I don't think it needs a separate vote necessarily.
Okay, so when the time comes, we will, that leaves the minutes in the consent agenda, but I think we may still get to a point where we vote on everything collectively. How about some updates? Who wants to start? Anybody want to start?
I can start.
All right.
So Green Space has a lecture this coming Thursday at 7 o'clock at the library on watershed awareness, which should be really interesting. Some good speakers that are talking about the Deer Creek and the River de Pere watersheds that are in Webster. So that's again Thursday at 7. Arbor Day is next week on April 25th. We're having a big tree planting at Blackburn Park at 3, followed by a ceremony and awards at 5:30. That will be at the Blackburn Park main pavilion. We have, I think, 300 trees that are going to be planted, and all of the hard work is being done by parks. So it's just show up and put trees in the hole. So that is a good thing to do as well. And then last meeting, I didn't give an HPC, a historic preservation update, but we did have one between that and the previous meeting. And the Missouri State Historic Preservation Office came and did a presentation on preservation grants and funding, which could be of interest to homeowners. And if you're interested, that recording is on YouTube. And if this was the March 14th meeting, and they had some grant ideas and some leads for people to go to if they're looking for that. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Hi, how are you? Good. Marie found my earring. That's not up.
You better pull your microphone down for the next thing then.
I have nothing to report.
I think what you said is important. David? Pam.
Hi, yes, sustainability met last night, and 3 things that were highlights were they're continuing their work with the Traffic Advisory Commission on creating a complete streets ordinance for our review. They've based the policy from a complete streets ordinance that is sort of a template and customized it for Webster, and we should be learning more about that in the coming weeks. Webster on Wheels, again, is their work is underway in planning that, which is going to be on May 7th. And they are looking for volunteers to man their booth, which will be about sustainability. They are going to be using a recycle wheel and some other things that they've worked with the county on using. And then finally, they did wrap up their discussion last night on their priorities for the upcoming fiscal year and requested funds for the commission's efforts to implement more items on Forever Webster Groves. And so they want to be a partner in the stormwater management plan and have offered $25,000 to contribute toward the fees for that. And so this morning I submitted the budget request form and outlined how we would break down the ARP funds that we had allocated to them last year. And that's it. So it was kind of a milestone because now we'll be able to put in exact dollar amounts into the fiscal budget and get more data about our built and natural environments and find ways to promote sustainability efforts for our residents and businesses. That's it.
Great, thank you.
Nothing for me, Mayor.
Just a quick update from Old Orchard, where they're finalizing their plans for their series again this summer, to run from mid-August through September. And no, it was not on, sorry. And then they had a interesting conversation about kind of the boundaries of the Old Orchard Business District, which is something that I don't know that many of us have taken a look at. So there may be future conversations around that as we look at kind of what is included there in that business district and what isn't. And no updates from the Architectural Review Board, although I will say I think they will be very interested in one of our topics, right, in the regular meetings.
Is there an opening on Old Orchard right now?
Yes.
There is, okay.
There might be.
Do you have you don't have an applicant?
No.
I thought when we went down in number, they were full. Because we went down in number.
The reason I'm asking.
Once you approve this?
Yeah.
Okay.
The reason I'm asking is the gentleman from Fire and Facet is very interested in bringing a Ferris wheel to the winter, just for one day in the winter time as part of the tree lighting ceremony. And I keep suggesting that he apply for the commission and talk to the commission, but it doesn't sound like he's done that yet.
No, we don't know of that, and
Okay.
that could maybe even take the place of the tree lighting ceremony.
Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Yeah, okay, thank you. Mr. City Attorney,
I have nothing to report.
Madam City Manager.
Yes, ma'am. Just a couple things. First, want to congratulate Green Space. So No Mow April has taken off. We ordered, I believe, 450 signs, and we've had requests beyond that. So we are, of course, asking people to keep their signs for next year. We imagine that it will continue to happen every April, but what a success for the very first year. So thanks to community members that were able to participate, even if they participated in a small way. Part of a yard, a backyard. Budget book. Each of you have the budget book in front of you. We'll be spending lots of time talking about budget. I cannot tell you how much work, how many hours, how much number crunching goes into this. And I really want to thank the finance team and in particular, Mr. Peterson. So we'll talk more about budget, but please dig into it, mark it up, make some tabs, ask us questions. It'll be a good budget year.
Eric, is this available online?
All right, that was it. Thank you.
All right, and Madam City Clerk.
Nothing.
All right, that leaves me, but of course I don't have nothing. The first thing I think, as all of you saw in our Friday update from the city manager, we have judicial candidates. Woohoo, which means we do need a subcommittee to go through, I think it's 10, and we're trying to figure out if the one non-resident understands that, you know, moving here would be a requirement of taking the job. So sort of thinking if we could get 3 volunteers to go through those and pick 3 that we interview, and that we would do those interviews at the next meeting, trying to keep this process moving. So whoever is selected can serve with Judge Whitney for a full month and get the lay of the land. Is there anyone interested in helping us choose who we interview for this position?
I'm available.
I can help.
Oh, look at that. We've got 3.
Good job, you guys.
All right, so that would be Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Alexander, and Councilwoman Hickson Shepherd. So we are turning this over to you. Dr. Peoples has access to all of the applications. In our conversations, we suggested that the entire council will get sent all the applications. Those of us not on the subcommittee can then contact one of you just to give you input that can be incorporated into your deliberations. And then, Katie, you're going to need some time to get in touch with them to set up the interview, right? And we can do that via Zoom.
Sure.
I'm thinking of a deadline for the subcommittee.
Yeah, is there a timeline?
Well, we are expecting to do interviews on May 2nd, so there's a very short timeline. So you notice how I got you to volunteer before I told you that part of it.
So it sounds like we need like maybe in 1 week to pick 3 applicants that would interview the next week. Is that
Yes, that,
kind of this part of the timeline?
yeah, I think that's probably the best. To have identified candidates by Monday or Tuesday, and that'll give Katie a week to get in touch with them.
So basically, the expectation is that we review all of the applicants as well as whatever input that we have from you guys,
Mhm.
from everybody else. And then, I would almost think like we did with the crab committee, list our top 3 maybe, and I mean, so.
So this way, actually, we're delegating that to you, that you identify who you believe the top 3
Okay,
to be, and then we'll collect all together, interview them, and then we'll do that ranking from the top ones.
okay, so basically the 3 of us are going to actually individually look at the applications and then.
Well, and I do think it would probably make sense to have one meeting just
Mm-hmm.
to sort through, make sure you all can come to an agreement on who those 3 are.
Sounds good.
You want to have those 3 by our first meeting in May, or?
They're gonna interview at our.
They're going to interview, so we need at least 5 days for Katie to have a chance to get in contact with them.
Like a week from today, we need to have our list of 3.
Yes. Can you work with that, Katie?
Sure.
Okay.
And I presume in person or via Zoom, they could interview.
I think given the amount of notice we're giving them, I think we have to give a Zoom option unless somebody really objects.
Okay, so we base-
As much as possible, I would like to see them face to face.
Yeah, okay,
Sure.
okay.
And then for our meeting, do we need to let you know when that is so you can post that? And do you need notice before of that?
Yes.
How much,
What did you
how
say?
much?
She's
how-
just checking on notice of the
24
meeting.
hours.
Okay, so 24 hours before we meet, we need to let Katie know when we're gonna. so-
Yes.
All right, so now it's up to the 3 of you.
Okay.
So thank you for that. Second thing, just a couple of other things. I attended the Deer Creek Watershed Stakeholder Committee meeting last week, which I learned a lot. I also missed a lot because I didn't know all the acronyms. Luckily, both Todd and Yvonne were there and they seemed to know everything that was going on. So I feel like we're in pretty good shape with them. There was a lot of discussion of funding opportunities and I watched both of them take very distinct notes. So I'm feeling pretty good about their level of commitment to the Deer Creek Watershed Alliance. You all received from me an agenda setting memo, just in an email. We haven't quite figured out exactly how to get things on the work session agenda that come from council members. If you would please, in the next couple of days, review that and send your comments on to me. We can briefly talk about it in our next meeting as we also talk about boards and commissions. And if you didn't see it, you got from the city manager. Pam became our first council member to use one of the forms, but we're trying to get a few more things in writing so that we actually, number one, have a record of what is going on, but also have a chance to see what consensus there is on putting things on our schedule. So if you'll take a look at those, just a couple more quick things. Art Fair is coming up in the first weekend of June. We have traditionally manned, womaned, personed a booth. Somebody is getting married that very same weekend that we know. So I'm going to suggest that if it's possible to do Sunday, that we do Sunday. And at least one of us can be excused.
Saturday.
Friday.
Friday. so you'll be
Yes.
there.
Yeah, are there there enough people for me that think they do that for me to say to the art fair, we'll schedule us?
Which date is that?
Yes, and believe me, anyone else up here or out there is welcome to join us.
Good time.
Sorry,
It's
which
fun.
date was
It
that?
is fun.
So it would be Sunday is the 4th of June.
Oh,
And then just two quick things. I was the speaker at Rotary on Friday and had a great time, and they asked really interesting questions. And then I also did a panel for Women's Voices Raised for Social Justice on gender and race in local government, which also got a whole lot of really great questions. And I got to be on the panel with the mayor of Maplewood and the mayor of Ferguson, both very impressive women. So that's it for updates, I believe. Now, usually this is the time where somebody's remembered something. All right, today.
Today it's my turn. We had a Tree City luncheon on Friday to celebrate Arbor Day, and Tree City and Webster got its 40-year sticker. So we've been a Tree City for 40 years, which, as Yvonne pointed out at the luncheon in front of everyone, is more than Kirkwood. So.
We do stick to the important things around here,
Yes.
don't we?
So but that was really good. It was great to see all the other people. It was very large attendance who are working on this, and we had some committee members from the Green Space there then that had representation and are kind of energized for the next year. So it's
Great, thank you.
so Laura, what time did you say on June 4th?
I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Afternoon is what we've typically done. Okay, so let's move on to our topics, and we will invite forward our Director of Planning and Development and going to be our frequent flyer for the night to talk to us about the comprehensive plan.
Jenny's going to put my slides up. And I have a lot of slides. I apologize. but-
Really?
Yeah.
So surprising.
Fancy that.
it's a big topic.
But hopefully, if I'm going to go through some of them rather quickly, but I'll let you know that I will provide them after the fact because there's a lot of details on it. I think I went ahead and did some history because I thought that would be important. Okay, so let's start with the first slide. So I always start with this when I'm training the Plan Commission and explaining to them that there is a Missouri state statute that talks about adopting a city plan and appointing a plan commission. So that is something that talks about the fact that the state, any municipality in the state may make, adopt, amend, and carry out a city plan, which references our comprehensive plan. Sorry, the mouse is not wanting to. Jenny, stop. That's okay. I got the mouse. There we go.
Battle started. I got.
This is the other state statute section that talks about the city plan contents. The city plan with its accompanying maps, plats, charts, and descriptive and explanatory manner shall show the commission's recommendations for the physical development, land uses, and may include, among other things, and has a long list of other things that it could include, but it focuses on that. And then it describes after that the zoning code, which some people get confused between what the zoning map is, the zoning map versus the comprehensive plan map. I usually like to do a few little bullets to explain what is the comprehensive plan supposed to be. It's supposed to serve as the guide for the city development, for the growth and the vision of the city. It's supposed to be created through the City Plan Commission with public engagement, and it's not a legislative act. It provides citizens with an expectation of their future land use. Again, most people, when they buy their house, they don't come to City Hall and say, can I see your comprehensive plan and see what's happening next door? But for those that do know, they know that there is in some ways an expectation of maybe what could happen on a property nearby them. And some people do come and ask, like, what's the property next to me zoned, and what could happen on that property before they purchase.
Mara, before you go on,
Yeah.
it's not a legislative act. I get that. Process is very different, but it still needs to be adopted. Is that right?
So it depends. Different cities have done them different ways. So for example, and I'll get to the point of the 2006 Development Foundation Plan. The only thing that the council at that time adopted was the maps. So again, it kind of comes back and forth. Sometimes it gets adopted via a resolution versus an ordinance. And our city attorney could probably tell you a little bit more how different communities do it. But in the past, our community has done it that it's been adopted, but not via ordinance.
I don't need the full thing right now.
But the only reason we don't call it a legislative act is it's not subject to referendum.
Okay,
Okay.
gotcha.
If it were a legislative act, it would be.
Move your microphone.
Is there a requirement, Mara, for, is there a statutory requirement as to how often we have to update the comprehensive plan?
There is not. And that's what one of my last bullets on this next slide is. It's usually good planning practice to revisit every 7 to 10 years. However, that 7 to 10 years for some communities that are built out means that you look at it and you don't do anything. So I'll kind of go through a little bit of the history to kind of show what we as a city have done. We always talk about it being a roadmap, a guiding document. It's supposed to be broad and general in scope. It's not supposed to be very specific. It's not supposed to say, we should have this many units here. It's not supposed to have setbacks in it and things like that, that you would find in the zoning ordinance. And it's supposed to be developed with significant public participation. It's always hard when we do rezonings, we notify people within a certain distance. When we go to do something like a big text amendment or something related to the comprehensive plan, we really need to try to involve the community better, and especially when it impacts the entire community. So the first comprehensive plan that the city of Webster Groves had, the drawing was done in 1955. And just as a reminder, at the same time, we were doing a pretty major amendment to the zoning code, which was adopted in 1956. The plan was finished in 1958. It was proposed to guide the future physical improvements of the community. In their case, they said for 20 to 30 years. So they assumed that we weren't going to really check on it very much. And it took the City Plan Commission 3 years to develop this plan. The focus in that plan was on residential, open space, schools, and parks. And so you can kind of see the areas were identified as like residential areas, public and semi-public areas. There was some commercial identified and industrial, but there wasn't really a more broader look at sort of pulling apart the uses. Then the comprehensive plan, there was a drawing done in 1966. It was meant to be a supplement to the 1958 comprehensive plan. That one stated it was going to guide the continuing development of the community for the next 25 years. That one was adopted by the City Plan Commission. And you can see here, there's pretty much 3 colors. You were either commercial, which was red. You were yellow, which was all the residential. Anything in green was parks, churches, community buildings. And there was one little swath you can see all the way up at the top that was industrial. The comprehensive plan that many of you have heard about and know about is our 1978 comprehensive plan. The drawing was done in 1975. The plan was approved in 1978. It really does not depart very materially from the plan from 1966. There is very little change to what it did. It did have some objectives and policies for this future comprehensive plan, and that's the current full comprehensive plan that the city has adopted in some way for the entire community. So again, 1978. Some of the key considerations when they were doing that revised 1978 from the 68 comprehensive plan, they looked at residential viability, they looked at commercial viability, they looked at institutional properties, they focused on population characteristics, costs of public services, and park and recreation areas. So you can see this map here is an additional map that was trying to focus on a lot of the changes that were happening, Elm, Interstate 44, as that was coming into play, Marshall Road. And so you'll see a couple big key areas that they were focusing on. In 2006, the Development Foundation Plan was adopted in part. It really isn't what you would call a standard comprehensive plan. It focused too much on details. It got into the weeds of exactly how many units in a particular area you should have. It had plans that actually identified and had little footprints of buildings. And the problem with doing something like that, instead of just broadly looking at a land use, is it kind of holds your hands and ties them a little bit to the flexibility of what a developer coming in can look at and can propose. So there were a lot of things that they got into, and I think because of that and what I've read from some of the things, this was before my time, they never ended up adopting the full plan, and they never really finished the full plan. There is a plan. It's an actual document. We do have it scanned online if you want to look at it. But you'll find that there's some little holes left in it where some photos were supposed to go, and most of it doesn't look completely finished. And so in September of 2006, the maps, which were the development area maps that were only for the commercial areas, were adopted. They really didn't look at residential per se. They were really focusing on key areas. They were talking about people versus automobiles, nature, looking at income generation. They were trying to sort of focus on that commercial and mixed use.
This,
Mara, after you.
I was just gonna ask, the titles of these,
Mhm.
where did those come from? Like foundation plan versus like a remake of a comprehensive? Is it just kind of shot in the dark?
I think it's more a shot in the dark.
Alright.
Yeah, it just happened to be whoever the consultant that was hired to do this one called it the Development Foundation Plan.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So Mara, you talked about this was a little bit too much micromanaging. What's the benefit then, or what was the benefit of adopting the maps without finishing the plan? I mean, if you look at Old Webster North, it seems like they did a fair amount of micromanaging there as well.
So in this area, and so again, the maps were only for the commercial districts. And I think the reason why they adopted, according to a few of the minutes and notes I've read, is that the commercial areas, they were hoping for some big development to come. And so they wanted to make sure that the Development Foundation Plan had areas identified that could go to mixed use that maybe weren't in the 1978 plan showing mixed use. So they did focus and identified areas that were supposed to be kept in, and I'll like, so one of these plans, this is, as you can see, this is Old Webster. So they kept some of the traditional colors. So the red is some of Old Webster that they say should just be kept and continue as it operates, kind of as a mixed use, like protect it. But then as you can see, in areas that they thought was going to be developed, they drew these very, very detailed plans with little footprints of buildings and parking lots. And so I think in adopting the map, it was trying to propose that you could start to make sure that if someone did come in to want to redevelop in one of these areas, that the comprehensive plan would match.
Gotcha.
And I just want to focus on this. This happened from March
Wait
2000.
1 second.
Oh,
Jenny,
sorry.
can you move the subtitles to the other
Mhm.
side, please? Thank you.
And I do have kind of a question, but
Actually, maybe move it up because then it won't block anything. Yes.
so how would you, I'm having how do you manage the expectations of residents if you don't have specifics in a plan? You know, if you just have bubble diagrams and shaded areas, how do you help them understand what the nuts and bolts of a plan are, or specific areas?
So each of these areas is given a definition. Like if you say that you want it to remain residential, it gives a lot of flexibility that it could be any of our residential zoning districts. But it just gives the idea that someone knows that that will go to residential or it will go to mixed use. But if you get too detailed into it, someone might come in and say, I want to do mixed use, but I'd like to use your B2 in the code, because the B2 has a very specific and gives you some additional height. Whereas if you come in with a PC, it's much more of a, you're throwing a plan at the Planning Commission and hoping that they're going to agree with all these things that you're asking for. So by having mixed use, it gives you 2 or 3 different options for someone coming in to develop to work within our community, but still meet the comprehensive plan intent.
So Mark, what was, and I missed what you said, you were talking about a part of this having been micromanaged?
So when you can look at, so if you look through this plan got to the point where it would say, in this area, you must have 140,300 square feet of light industrial. So by saying that, you are, and that's not Old Webster, but it was one of the sub areas over near Kirkham. by saying that, you haven't had a public hearing with the community of that immediate area with all the specifics of what are the setbacks going to be? How tall is it going to be? How much parking are they going to have? What's the traffic going to be impacted? So by putting very specific square footage on it, you are taking away the ability for the council to review a proposal by someone. Usually a comprehensive plan identifies just sort of larger swaths of, it's a guiding document, but it doesn't give the specifics. When someone needs specifics, they rezone. So then the zoning ordinance has setbacks, height, parking requirements, and those items. So it's sort of like you go from a more general to more specific to then like the building code. So you kind of get more detailed as you go.
So then, based on what you're saying up there was never a completed, completed changes by the councils here. The most complete was in the commercial area.
Yeah, so they only looked at commercial areas. They literally only looked at commercial areas. If you look at this last, sorry, let's go back one. See these red bubbles? Those are the only areas they looked at in this 2006 plan.
And is that where you're saying that there was the micromanagement? that
Yeah,
was
so
there?
they only
Okay.
looked at those areas. And then once they looked at those
They
areas,
micromanaged.
they got really into the weeds. And let me tell you, there are communities who do things, these types of plans, but they're not considered your comprehensive plan. You can do neighborhood plans and area plans. They're definitely things that you can do, but you don't do them at a citywide level, and you don't preface it by telling the community that you're adopting it as part of the comprehensive plan. If you're going to do a neighborhood plan, that's another level of planning. And then you can get into much more detail. You can almost, sometimes neighborhood plans create a new set of setbacks and guidelines. You can do a different type of zoning onto them. So you can get into those weeds, but you don't want to do it as part of your comprehensive plan. You want to do it as a different type of plan.
So we could do a neighborhood plan for Old Webster North,
Yes, you could definitely do a
without
neighborhood.
touching our comprehensive plan.
Yep, you can do a neighborhood plan. You can also do things like, so some communities do, when they will come in and rezone an entire area and use more of a form-based code instead of the zoning code. And the form-based talks more about the architecture and the look and is much more of your walkable. So it kind of tells you more things about how you can have uses on different levels. And like that you want to encourage first floor commercial, you want to encourage residential up above, those kinds of things, you can put those in place.
I mean, what effectively has changed from even 1978 till now in regards to our comprehensive plan? Like, why would we look at this? I mean, I understand the 7 to 10 years and we say, oh, so be it.
There's a lot of very outdated language, referencing things that should not be in the plan anymore from the 70s.
Gotcha.
We really should be updating that language importantly. So that is sorry, I'm gonna.
Sorry, Mara, when you say there's outdated language, can you give like kind of categories of what that would fall into? Like, are we
Some of it
talking?
was on screen, like.
The focus is on single family residential. The focus is on not as much diversity in terms of housing types in the community. It's very, very limited on the ability to do 2-family structures, multifamily structures.
Front entry garages.
That's not in there at all. That's in the zoning code.
So, but you characterize it as language, but that language has an impact on policy.
The
The
language has an
choices that we make.
It's a direction.
Yeah.
Correct.
So when you say that the only places that they focused on in here were the commercial, is that then why we have the restrictions that we do in the north of the whole Webster North,
Old Webster, whatever we want to call
North,
it, yeah.
whatever it is, over there where we just have such limitations right now in terms of what we can do? Does it have to do with this?
No, it doesn't. Because in fact, this encourages it to go to mixed use. So no, it's just the current zoning that provides the limitations right now.
So then, if you're looking at, so I know that you said that you kind of keep the detail separately from the comprehensive plan to the zoning requirements, but would the comprehensive plan not inform some of the things we want to see in zoning?
No, because they're very different from one another. So if the comprehensive plan, if you say that a particular area should be residential, the zoning ordinance then has 4 different residential categories that you would be looking at in relationship to what's around it and whether you would allow someone to rezone from an A1, say, to an A4. So they're very different from each other, the zoning ordinance, than the comprehensive plan.
But like they're linked, right? I mean, inform.
They are linked, but they don't, so the comprehensive plan informs all of you whether if someone comes in and says, I want to rezone this and build a gas station, you can look at that comprehensive plan and know, is this something that we wanted to go to commercial in the future? Or is that supposed to stay as single family residential, for example? It helps guide you on when a rezoning comes in, are you in conformance with that? So when you come in to rezone, it's not going to tell you, you must rezone to PC or B2. Both of those are mixed use zoning districts, but it's going to inform you that it's encouraged to go to mixed use. So it will help inform you that you could approve a rezoning because the communities had the conversation about the direction of a particular area or piece of land.
But that's assuming that the community has had a conversation, because it sounded like in some of these plans, the community, there's not a community involvement.
No, the community's been involved in all of these plans so far.
Oh, okay.
Yes, major meetings
That's
in
not
all
kind
of
of
these
messed up,
plans.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
all of these plans so far have involved years of meetings.
Okay.
Yes. So in this case, this one, let me go back. Nope. Let me go back to this. In this one, from March 2005 through September 2005, 3 major community meetings. They had a visioning session, development sessions, and a community open house in addition to other meetings. And all of their findings are in the back of this document. So you can see what the community said.
But merely because it's in the comprehensive plan, to the extent that it's not adopted, doesn't dictate any council.
Say that again.
So let's say the comprehensive plan calls for across the street mixed use development, and then a developer comes here and wants to build single family homes. This council could say, okay, build single family homes. We're not tied to the comprehensive plan.
I'll let the city attorney answer that one.
The city, the plan is supposed to be guidance again, but you still have the discretion to make changes if you would decide that changes are appropriate. You would have the ability, there's a vehicle to make the change.
Exactly. It's guidance, not direction.
But this one was never adopted. So is this considered guidance still, or is this just kind of like an FYI?
I frankly think it's kind of an FYI. Like,
The maps were adopted by the
3
council.
years of an FYI.
The maps were adopted by the council, but not the documents.
Right.
So
Madam Mayor. So part of this discussion, as Mara makes her way through the slides, there's some questions for council to consider. But part of us bringing this to you is because that is the question. What has been adopted? What is guidance? What is an FYI? I like that sentiment to it. But how does council want to view this? I'm not asking you to answer that now, but what do we want in a comprehensive plan? What do we think the public engagement should look like? What pieces need to be updated? Would you prefer neighborhood plans? There's all kinds of consideration points.
And so I guess that's a fundamental question I always have about comprehensive plans, like what's the purpose? If we're not dictated by it, if we don't have to follow it per se, and we can willy-nilly decide, oh, we're gonna go with single family home.
Okay, I'll take that one
Yeah.
if you don't mind. It's a public discussion that way.
Oh, and I'm
Right,
happy
you know-
to have that, but why make it in a comprehensive plan?
Because it's a formal process by which we go to the public and ask certain questions and ask for certain guidance from them in a structure that is recognized across time and across places.
And you're
Is that
looking at how all the parts and pieces relate to
Well,
each other or don't relate to each
yeah.
other, but how they all fold together.
But
So you
then,
have to look
then
big picture.
why would we, when we adopted the statute or the ordinance that permitted duplexes and 70% of Webster, was that within?
That
any
was the
comprehensive-
zoning. That was the zoning.
But it's it's part of.
But it's not the comprehensive plan. That was the zoning ordinance. So even though this says residential, like the comprehensive plan has a yellow category that says residential, it does not say single family residential, it says residential. So if your zoning category allows for two family, you don't have to rezone your property to do a two family. It was going to be in conformance with the comprehensive plan.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm going to go through a couple of these quickly to get you to your conversation. This last thing is just sort of a big summary of there were plans done in 58, 66, and 78. They were reviewed in many subsequent years, but no actual amendments were made. So that's just a clarification of they did review them. You can see some things where they talked about like, we haven't really built nothing's really changed. This last decade's been fine. We're in conformance, which a lot of communities do. Bring it up to the Plan Commission, ask them if they would like to revisit the comprehensive plan, and then make a determination. So that did happen over many years. Development Foundation Plan meetings were held from 2005 to 2006. And then in 2017, because when I would be working with people and explaining to them whether they were in conformance or not, I was looking at 2 maps, actually more like 6 maps, because I was looking at a map from 78 and then individual maps for each commercial district when someone would come in. So in 2017, we merged those together to a new comprehensive plan map. So map only. We held multiple hearings before the Plan Commission, multiple hearings before the City Council. We brought these different areas to the different taxing districts and updated the map to merge those all together. So we at least had one map that no longer had little footprints of buildings and parking lots. And we made a mixed use category. So if you look at the 78 map, it had public, semi-public, commercial, and industrial. That was it.
So that says done in 1917. Is that intentional?
Sorry, 2017.
Okay.
Sorry. I had all these 19s in there. That was 2017. Drawing was done in 2017. So we combined the maps of both. It was adopted by the Plan Commission and the map was adopted by the City Council. So this is this next step. What are we would like to talk through like your considerations for a comprehensive plan update. Comprehensive plan updates usually include a pretty large data gathering, sometimes by the community itself, sometimes by a consultant. It includes a series of public meetings. Usually there are larger community meetings. Sometimes there's smaller focus group meetings. Sometimes they're combined with Plan Commission and City Council meetings. It just depends on what you put in your request for proposal. We have put $150,000 into our budget for the new year to do a comprehensive plan update. We did look at other communities that have done updates in the last 5 years or so. Kirkwood, Creve Coeur, Brentwood, a couple others. In addition, you can see a couple of these titles. I have access to a number of what we call planning advisory service memos that talk on a national level about how to integrate important things into your comprehensive plan. Typically, you will find the comprehensive plan has housing, land use, some environmental issues, transportation and economic development. Many of the comprehensive plans are now including sustainability, social equity, energy, and climate change. So what I've started to do is gather a series of these notes that can be made available to the council to review. We also have some other things. Sometimes there's training that we can provide where it's someone else explaining what the comprehensive plan is and does. So we were going to leave it at this and see if there was sort of further discussion and questions.
Besides terminology, how would we update housing within a comprehensive plan?
So right now that our comprehensive plan from 1978 has some very specific things related to single family. It has some very specific things related to size of, if you do multifamily, a minimum unit size that you must meet. There's some things in there that we're trying to focus the community to single family residential only. So
Like zoning.
Correct. There are, so as comprehensive plans have grown over the years, planning, planners, plan commissions, city councils have found ways to focus their comprehensive plan to address something on broader topics, which is why all these reports are available. So there are ways to talk about health or equity when you normally wouldn't think you'd be talking about them when it comes to policy and direction from your comprehensive plan.
And so I guess my initial thought when I look at this is I'm okay with spending $150,000, but I don't see a need to do a comprehensive plan. I'd like to talk about land use, about environment, about transportation, but I see no reason to do it in a comprehensive plan.
All right, other thoughts? Questions for Mara? I don't go anywhere yet. You're thinking you're gonna get away.
I mean, it sounds good. It's a big price tag. So we have some other big price tag things that we're looking at too, the stormwater master plan. We haven't heard back on, possible buyouts, staffing costs. So I'm just reluctant to say like, I want to do this now. I'm not saying I don't want to do it now, but I'm just like reluctant to make a decision on direction there. My concern is that if we do go forward with a comprehensive plan, I don't want to hold up other things. So Old Webster North, I would really love to see some movement on that, like letting the property owners know that it's, not being considered for redevelopment, that they are free to make improvements and they're not worried about, eminent domain coming in. I hear like, where are planters, not where are their planters? It's not necessarily from them that are saying that, but it's been a year and we haven't done anything. So my nervousness is I don't want that to get hung up and we do a comprehensive plan for a year and then we make changes for a year before we can do anything with areas like that.
Madam Mayor. So thank you. And we didn't need necessarily direction tonight because this is certainly a budget discussion topic. Wanted you all to start thinking about it. In some manner, I've heard from each of you that we have, whether we're discussing how we have diversified housing stock. What do we, strategic planning talks a lot about our land use, which gets to the flood buyouts as you were discussing. What do we do with Old Webster North? How do we move forward with that? As we talk about density, all those sorts of things. And I'm not sure that I would agree with Ms. Perry that we're talking about an update. It may simply be a new comprehensive plan as we have public engagements. So perhaps now's the time, maybe now's not the time. But my recommendation would be as we start going through this process, what are those priorities and how does it align with the strategic plan, especially around land use? And I also didn't bring in the R word. We've talked about revenue. How does the comprehensive plan talk about, economic development and as we move forward with that? So, and there's a lot of different ways that this could be done. And the only other thing I would say is that you all set the pace on this. Perhaps it is an update to Ms. Perry's point, and perhaps it's not a year-long project or a 2-year-long project. Maybe there are key points that you all want to look at and have updated. And so we could go about it in that manner. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there that there's a lot of things to consider.
What about the plan commission? Have you run this by them? Have they presented any thoughts on
So
it?
whenever we've done training, which we try to do training every year to 2 years, there's been a conversation of when are we going to, and I call it update only because we technically have one in place. So usually they call that an update, even though it's been so many years. For a new community that might just be starting, they would call it a brand new comprehensive plan. But even if we started from scratch, which at this point we are starting from scratch, they typically call it an update. There's other ways where people, so for example, Chesterfield, about, it would have been 15 years ago, simply updated key areas that they knew they needed to do something with. So for example, we have a couple areas where people have come in and asked about redevelopment, and right now the comprehensive plan doesn't match things that people want to do. So are you going in, you can't go in and just change one single piece because then you're spot zoning a piece. But if you're looking at an area overall, you might be able to make some updates to things that haven't been touched since 1978.
But hold on a second. Karen's been waiting for a while, so let's let her get in and then.
I don't know if this would go to the budget discussion, but what drives that cost? I mean, if we're looking at things that are updates and some of the things that we could update without doing a new, What drives that cost?
So we threw that in as a number just because we knew that Kirkwood had done, like, so again, Kirkwood, Creve Coeur, a couple of the others had done updates where they had had a plan that had been, in some cases, maybe 20 years out. Those included things like 5 public meetings, a certain number of small group meetings. So I mean, I've got some of those that we can provide you all so that you can see what some of the other communities have done. But for example, Creve Coeur. Creve Coeur did 4 meetings, October, November again, and December, all in 2016, 2017. And their document included 5 public workshops in conjunction with the Plan Commission. They then had 5 focus group meetings, another 6 focus group meetings with stakeholders and residents. They had 4 more client group meetings, 9 stakeholder focus group meetings, and then had a series of them like all overlapping. That is $150,000. So, I mean, but some others have done the same cost and focused them more on getting more demographics or getting more economic development. It just kind of depends on what piece parts you want to put in the plan. So
Okay, 1 second. I'm just let's limit this at this point to questions for Mara, because we're going to have this discussion about whether it's a good investment for us during the course of the budget. So please continue with your question.
I'm just curious, it's something we would go out for bids on, like, and people would bring back proposals to us of how that would go and how that money would be spent, correct?
Yes, definitely. And if you go to, there's a national planning website, our planning.org, and I can send a link. You can see all the other communities and see what they currently have out there.
That would be great.
I don't have a question, but I do have a statement. I think this is just an important piece of the puzzle for us doing our strategic planning out 3, 5, 7 years out. Be something that will be here when we're gone. It's something that needs to be considered, that's for sure.
So in that vein, given that we're essentially fully built, right? Given that we've been through Douglas Hill, we've been through the duplex, there's a statement that a good portion of our community needs to remain single family homes. I'm not suggesting all, by the way. What do you see as the greatest benefit we get out of going through this process?
I think we have a whole new generation of people living within Webster that were never a part of these conversations. And I think this new generation, whether they grew up here and are now raising their families here, or whether they have raised their kids here and are staying, or those of us that have moved from outside. It's a whole new look compared to even just 2005, 2006.
Right.
I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, can we leave it there on that note? Mara, thank you
Thank you,
very
Mara.
much. Those of you who I know, a couple of you are here for the public hearing. We're going to finish our work session here and then we'll be a little behind schedule, but we're going to do our best to get close to 7:30 to start our regular meeting. Mr. Peterson, Director of Finance, Assistant City Manager, on to our fiscal quarterly update, please.
That was a weighty topic and this is even weightier.
I know, we're embracing everything tonight. Bring it all on.
Madam Mayor, we also have the budget introduction on the regular agenda. So if Mr. Peterson doesn't get through all of this conversation and you want to stop in a time, we can carry over to the regular meeting as well.
Thank you for that. That's a good point.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members. Eric Peterson, Assistant City Manager, Director of Finance and Administration. I think I got it here, Jenny. This is our Q3 budget update for fiscal year 23, the current fiscal year that we're in right now. Again, a reminder for everyone at home, webstergrovesmo.gov/budget gives you all access to all the details and documents we are talking about. Council members, I just realized that I hit the print button on your actual line item reports, but I never actually went to the printer and got them printed off. So I will get them printing while we move on to the next part of the meeting, make sure to get them out to you all. They are online now. Just our quick update here. I'm sorry, I realized it still says Q2, but quick accounting update, performance update for the quarter, deficit reduction status, our 5-year plan updates, and then our quarterly investment report. That's what we're talking about tonight. Again, a reminder, you've all seen this slide many times, the structural deficit here at the city, annual reoccurring expenses, exceed the amount of the annual reoccurring revenue. That is the fundamental nature of our budget reality. Reoccurring revenues are those that can be reasonably expected to occur repeatedly year after year, one times obviously not reasonably expected to. Couple new accounting items that we have implemented in the finance team. We have broke out our block party permits and barricade rentals that we implemented a fee this year for the first time for those events. And so rather than have them all bundled in miscellaneous income and just sort of hidden in there, this allows some tracking on that. Then also the police sales tax, we retitled that account code to the public safety sales tax to match the 2017 proposition title name. It was originally police sales tax in our system long ago. So we just updated that title.
How much are the block party permits?
Block party permits are $25 with a mandatory requirement for 4 barricades. Because obviously if you're shutting a road down, so it's going to be 45 total.
Gotcha.
With the barricade rental.
Thank you.
There are some block parties, because of the number of blocks they choose to close, have to pay some more for rentals. 2023, this is our all funds budget, in our year to date, our budget revenue and actual year to date, we're at, as of 4/5, April 5th, 78% of revenue, all funds, 70% of expenditures. As you can see, we are ahead on the budget, revenue over expenditures. Looking at year to date fiscal 22, you can see some of the differences there between the year. And not unsurprisingly, with the ARP spending really moving a lot of those expenditures up in 23. General fund is, of course, what we pay the closest attention to with our deficit reduction plan. Currently, we're at 75% of revenue, 70% of expenditures as of April 5th. We are at this point at April 5th, $794,000 ahead in the budget. Again, that's year to date. The vast majority of property taxes are now in, so it's really our smaller charges for services, recreational fees, and then the sales tax revenue monthly will be the ongoing cash flow.
Is that? Sorry, it just looks like the budget and the actual year to date are both the same direction. Like, shouldn't they both be, are we negative 794
Which one?
in the actual year to date?
That is a great question. I don't think I got updated too well. I apologize. I'll take a look at that and get.
That's okay. I'm just curious if we're up or not up.
That 794 number is wrong. The 13.9 and 16.2, those would be pretty accurate for where we should be at this year in the general fund.
Okay, thanks.
Capital Improvement Fund, I just wanted to highlight, we're at 81% of our revenue there again. Coming in through sales tax. Sales taxes are well outperforming. We'll talk about that briefly here. 91% of expenditures through the fund that has been approved. A big part of that capital fund, obviously, oftentimes we have the budget approved and then those capital dollars start to flow almost immediately. So. Park Improvement Fund, 61% of revenue, 61% of expenditures, in a good spot as well. But we should be 240 ahead year to date. Wanted to highlight some of our revenues. This is all the general fund here, and I'm going to get myself out of the way. You can all see this. As you can see, compared to where we were at this point last year, and then where our various property tax, intergovernmental revenues are, you can see our revenue lines are doing well. I just want to highlight sales tax looks like it's really far ahead. That is because last year did not have the public safety sales tax in the general fund. So we are ahead on sales tax, but not $1.5 million ahead on sales tax. That is what was another fund last year. Utility tax, we're going to talk about this in the budget, but again, utility taxes are doing better than they did in 22, as you can see, but they still lag. They have not caught back up. We have been every year living, as I say in the budget, in a hope for a utility tax to come back. It has not come back. And so we need to assess whether or not we should reassess our estimates there. Licenses are down compared to last year at this point. We are ahead in inspection fees and permits. Fines are slightly down. Charges for services. This number is going to shock many of you, 35%. We're going to talk about that in just a second. That relates to ambulance charges. We'll get to that in a second. I do want to highlight other income, obviously, is well ahead of where we were last year. That's our investment strategy coming through in that line item there, as well as our one-time insurance settlement, the legal settlements, and all those one-time funds that are built in there.
And other income.
and other income, yes. So revenue highlights, local use tax, we are trending well ahead of our estimate by 145,000. So as we talk about the budget, that's very good news on terms of an annualized number. Sales taxes, we are 367,000 ahead of where we were. So despite inflation, despite the threat of recession, consumer growth and consumer spending is still driving our revenue. And when you look at it, 40% of the general fund comes from sales tax. Utility gross receipts, again, we are 269,000 ahead of revenue. That still leaves us about 300,000 short of where we historically have been and where we have budgeted. So. Recreation fees, again, credit to the Parks and Recreation Department. They're 235,000 ahead of revenue at this time last year. Our interest, again, returning over 2,100% of budget in the interest line item. So I'm very proud of what Mr. Donovan has done with our investment strategy. Didn't want to just talk about ambulance charges. Obviously, you can see we've collected 123,000 at this point, early April versus 321,000 year to date in 22. That shortfall happened when the fire department switched to software provider. Their call data was not being picked up by the billing agent. And so we had about 5 months of calls that hadn't been billed. So those have all been provided. Billing is happening. But again, we are in a lag time now on collecting that revenue as Proclaims catches up on that. That internal process issue has been rectified, and we will make sure all calls get properly billed and promptly.
Mr. Peterson, maybe we should pause right here.
Sounds good.
And then we can pick this up during the budget introduction, and we'll just take 5 minutes and come back. For those of you who may be here for the public hearing and would like to make a public comment, on the table just inside the door are cards that look like these. If you will just fill that out and turn it in here at the end, it'll be much easier for us to use those for public comments, both on the hearing and then if you want to make general public comments. So please go ahead and fill out a comment card during this break if you would like to speak. All right, welcome to the April 18th regular meeting of the Webster Grove City Council. Please note residents can share comments in person, virtually via Zoom, using the raised hand option, via email or US mail. Written comments will not be read aloud at the meetings. All speakers are allowed 3 minutes, and we are happy to have you there with us. Please, I'll call on you for your 3 minutes to speak. If you would like to speak and have not yet filled out a card here on the table and out inside the door, please do fill out that speaker card so we know that those of you in the room would like to speak. Again, if you're on Zoom, you'll use the raise your hand function. And you will be able to speak both during the public hearing if you'd like, and then also there's a time for remarks from the community, which is on the agenda. We will start with roll call.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Arnold,
Here.
Councilmember Bliss.
Here.
Councilmember Franklin.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Alexander.
Here.
Councilmember Richardson.
Here.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Here.
All right, thank you. We will now begin with our public hearing, the Historic District Solar Code and Guideline Amendments, which are amendments to the Architectural Review Board, Section 56.050, permit application submitted to the board, and amendments to the Historic District Guidelines in Central Webster, Marshall Place, Old Webster, and Webster Park Historic Districts to allow for solar panels on front roof elevations and review regulations. We will start with welcome back to our Director of Planning and Development. Please proceed.
A whole lot less slides. As soon as they come up, I'll start. Yep. No worries. So just as I'll just start before the slides come up. The premise for this was a lot of conversations with the sustainability commission, as well as I know others that have come to us with questions about how solar can be encouraged within the community. A number of years back, we did do, I can probably go through them. Hold on. A number of years back, we did do a community-wide process for encouraging solar. At that time, a lot of new solar projects came on board, which included things at Webster University on our own facilities, as well as some other commercial properties. And then a number of residents took advantage of that, as well as tax credits to put solar on their properties. The proposal that we're looking at now is focusing on the 4 historic districts. The historic districts, which were all adopted as historic districts at different points in time, all adopted either with their ordinance or during the process of their ordinance being adopted, a set of guidelines. Most people will notice that those guidelines pretty much look almost exactly the same. It seems like the first one that was adopted was just used as an example for future ones. But those all included some very specific restrictions when it came to things on a roof of a historic structure. So when it comes to that, it makes it difficult if someone is coming forward with solar panels as the change in the technology has happened, that some of the original panels that used to come before us were very clunky and didn't really blend in with the look of the roof. Newer technology has continued. We aren't really getting what some of the other communities have been getting. A few Tesla tiles, solar panels are starting to come out that are actually tiles on the roof itself versus being a raised structure on top. But we wanted to try to encourage and look at, even if someone's not using some of those other newer technologies, how they could move forward in a more expeditious manner. So the 2 key things, and they're very, very simple changes. Over the last few years, we've done a few things where we've tried to update things that could be administratively approved instead of having to go to the Architecture Review Board. And in this case, we had just last year updated it to say solar panels on a front elevation where the panels are evenly spaced across the roof line didn't have to go. They could be administratively approved. And that has really streamlined the ones that weren't in historic districts. We really have had none of them having to go to ARB. The proposal that we're making this evening is to change this to say solar panels on the front elevation, including in a historic district, where the panels are compositionally balanced on the roof. So instead of saying evenly spaced, that sometimes means that they have to be in some perfect grid pattern, but it would be more focused on the idea that you were looking at the composition of it on the roof. And so that's also language that was recently adopted in a change to the guidelines in, I think it was Washington, DC's code. So it kind of was a nice way to kind of tie that in. The other change that we're proposing is not a change that's actually in any of our codes. It is simply making a change into those guidelines. And I think I'd stated before, the guidelines are pretty much the same between those 4 districts: Old Webster, Marshall Place, Webster Park, and Central Webster. All of them have a roof section that is saying that if you install anything new on a roof, that you should try to put it inconspicuously in the rear or on a side so that it's not readily visible, so that the overall front facade image is not impeded upon. We are proposing to take the word solar panels out. And because of the way that they were all adopted in so many different ways, we went through the history. The only one that was adopted with an actual ordinance was Webster Park. Central Webster, Marshall Place, and Old Webster, you have to go through the minutes and you see that the Kit City Council made comments on the guidelines, but the guidelines weren't attached to the ordinance. So what we are doing in this way is just recommending that the ordinance itself, which if any of these districts came to the council and said, I'd like to update our guidelines, we would probably do it in a similar process, letting the community know. We did send out 700 letters to cover our bases in all 4 of these districts. And we did get a very, very small number back. It's probably the best I've ever seen in terms of an overall number that we got out, and have not had a number of returns. But this would cover making those changes per the ordinance. It won't be adopted in any code because we don't have this language in the code. It would just be an adoption to the guidelines. And that is all I have in terms of slides.
Are there questions for Amara?
Sounds really promising. Good.
I
Thank you
like it.
for the work that you've done on this.
Does skylights come up a lot? I'm just wondering if
Skylights-
we could strike that one too, but it's not a big deal to me.
They don't come up very often anymore. I think because a lot of times the skylights leak over time. And so people find other ways or means to provide additional light in. I haven't seen a skylight on a plan in quite a while. There might have been some that I haven't seen, but
I was
haven't
just
seen
thinking
one.
while we're striking things, maybe I could strike more, but I'm good with just what's there too.
All right, other questions for Mara? Thank you very much. We'll move on to our public comments on the hearing itself, and we'll start with Max Banerjee. Am I close? Oh, good. Please come on up. And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. So my name is Max Banerjee. I grew up here and I just recently moved back. And I'm excited to learn about the things that Webster Groves is doing, like for Webster Groves. And I'm encouraged by the action the city's taking to mitigate and combat climate change. I think changes like the one that she just mentioned are encouraging. And I hope that it'll be approved. And I hope that the city will continue to pursue actions like this now that'll help Webster mitigate and adapt to climate change. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have John Reeve. And I forgot to ask, I'm supposed to ask you to state your name and your address. Max, that's on me, not on you.
Yeah, my name is John Reeve. I live on Webster Park, 48 Mason, Webster Park, and we've lived there for about 26 years. I'm an architect, and I've made a lot of improvements, climate-related improvements to my property, including 17 solar panels on the rear-facing roofs. And I've also done a geothermal overhaul of my heating system. And I have EV charger, electric charge. And I can say that those improvements have been significant in their impact. And I'd like to see Webster encourage homeowners with their own resources, because it takes resources to do this. So if a homeowner has the interest and the ability to make these kind of improvements, I think the city should allow it and encourage it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. We also have Jamie Hassemeyer.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hassemeyer, 215 East Swan. I would just like to applaud the work done here at City Hall, specifically the work that Mara put into thoroughly going through this process to hopefully help all of our neighbors and friends access renewable energy, solar panels, without getting snagged up here at City Hall with the Inflation Reduction Act. There are loads of opportunities for citizens to access these with rebates and improve reduce their emissions and improve their efficiencies. So thank you very much to council and to Mara and to Dr. Peoples. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We also have Lisa McDade.
Hi, thank you. Lisa McDade. I live at 424 Park Road in Webster Park, and am called tonight to just speak to the aesthetics of being in favor of having solar panels put on the facades of our house. The beauty of our neighborhood is the homes and the green spaces and the yards. I walk the neighborhood with my dog on the daily, and just feel that as a member of the community of Webster Park, as a resident, I don't feel that solar panels placed not equally, what was the term? There was like the right term to change that. It would not deter from the beauty of our homes in the park. So I support this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I believe we have at least one hand on Zoom. Mr. Hoteling, I believe it is your turn for public comment. As soon as Jenny allows it. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, very briefly, just I'm excited about the possibility that this will be changed and enacted. I live at 118 West Cedar in the old Webster district. I've lived here about 23 years, and I just simply want to say, to me, it seems like a no-brainer, and I applaud you guys for really being proactive in looking at ways to ensure that our earth is as healthy as possible. So thank you very much.
All right, is there anyone else on Zoom who wants to raise their hands before we move on? All right, then I will ask the city attorney to enter the items into the record, please.
Madam Mayor, I would move for the introduction of the following exhibits in support of ordinance 9224. Number one, the city council staff report prepared by Mara Perry, Director of Planning and Development for the meeting dated April 18th, 2023. Number two, the historic district guidelines for the Central Webster, Marshall Place, Old Webster, and Webster Park historic districts. Number three, an email from Jeff Smith received on April the 8th of 2023. Number four, Mara Perry's PowerPoint before the city council this evening, April the 18th of 2023. And finally, the zoning code of the city of Webster Groves.
Thank you very much. That closes now our public hearing. And Councilmember Hickson Shepherd, would you call for the first and second reading, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the first and second reading of bill number 9224.
Second.
Bill 9224, first reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, amending chapter 56, Architectural Review Board by revising section 56.050, permit applications submitted to the board, including the process for administrative approval and amending historic guidelines for solar panels in 4 historic districts and matters related thereto.
Thank you. Is there questions, discussion? Are there questions or discussion? No, we'll have the second reading then, please.
Bill 9224, second reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, amending chapter 56, Architectural Review Board by revising section 56.050, permit applications submitted to the board, including the process for administrative approval and amending historic guidelines for solar panels in 4 historic districts and matters related thereto.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to the remarks from the community and visitors. I have one comment card, and that is from Evie Yost. Please come on up, give us your address, and you have your 3 minutes.
My name is Evie Yost. I live at 524 Lee Avenue. Calls made to the fire department that are fire related are far less than in past years. Is this a reason to reduce manpower or machinery? No. Majority of fire calls are medical emergencies, many of which involve cardiac arrest. Studies from the NAOS and the AHS prove that manpower of up to 6 is most beneficial to cardiac arrest calls because it allows multiple personnel to perform CPR and AED procedures without tiring out one paramedic. It also allows better aid in after resuscitation care and quicker transportation to a medical facility. Fire EMS also respond to collisions, gas leaks, floodings, and wires down, all of which require road closures and manpower to remain on site to inspect and ensure the public stay at a safe distance. If a call for fire comes in, the department must be ready in staff and equipment to handle whatever they will meet on scene. Our city's duty is to ensure their department is equipped and trained to complete their tasks. Inability to provide and ensure their department is equipped means our city is allowing for improper response to accidents, which allow a greater risk of fatalities. A firefighter's work isn't limited to calls. I train physically and mentally. They do paperwork, they cook and clean. They must always remain in an active state of mind in case a call should come in, be it 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning. They can't walk away from a scene or hide in a closet if what they see is more than they can handle. They have to perform and assess facts while keeping their opinions and emotions to themselves. They have continuing education as they have degrees that they must complete in order to cross-train, such as firefighter, paramedic, or to specialize in their different fields, such as critical care paramedic or fire marshal. Our city government was found in violation of a previous contract. People stated they would honor the ruling. The ruling wasn't optional. People stated sick day bonus was an antiquated practice. As part of a binding contract, one party cannot simply change terms. Peoples wants to revise an entire system under the premise that it will reduce the budget. Benefits to employees build a better work ethic and long-term employees. Take those incentives away and you will increase turnover rate, which will result in more budget expense to cover constant training of new hires. People allowed our fire department to operate out of a pickup truck as a makeshift ambulance for 6 days, which is a serious ethical violation. She may say she secured us the necessary vehicles after 6 days, but a leader who is willing to risk both legal retribution on the city and the safety of its employees and citizens of this city would never put either party in such a negligent position. Since Peoples was hired, the fire department has filed numerous grievances due to their mistreatment by the city, and it's been a primary factor in the loss of fire personnel. People's actions have created a hostile environment between fire and city, which has created difficulty in obtaining new hires and results in continuous overtime in the department. People can blame other agencies and people.
Time.
Thank you very
you.
much. Does anyone have any new business for us here?
Madam Mayor, did you want to see if there are any hands?
Oh, I guess yes, I was looking and I didn't see any, but Jenna, you want to verify? All right, thank you. Appreciate the reminder. No new business then from council members? All right, then we're going to move on to unfinished business. Councilwoman Alexander, would you call for the third reading of bill number 9222?
Yes, Mayor, I would like to call for the third and final reading of bill number 9222 and its subsequent adoption.
Second.
Bill 9222, third reading. An ordinance amending ordinance 8099 for a PC planned commercial district on an approximately 1.8 acre tract of land at the southwest corner of Elm Avenue and Big Bend Boulevard, including properties at 8720 through 8780 Big Bend Boulevard, and repealing ordinance 8099 and matters related thereto.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right, we'll have the vote then, please.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson.
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes. Councilmember Franklin, could you call for the third reading of bill number 9218, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to call for the third and final reading of bill number 9218 and its subsequent adoption.
Second.
Bill 9218, third and final reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, repealing chapter 4, boards and commissions in its entirety and replacing it with a new chapter 4, boards and commissions as referenced in the attached exhibit A.
Questions or comments? Right, we'll have the vote, please.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson.
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss, could you call for the third reading of bill number 9219, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the third and final reading of bill number 9219 and subsequent adoption.
Second.
Bill 9219, third and final reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, creating chapter 44, business districts as referenced in attached exhibit A.
Questions or comments? May we please have the vote?
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson.
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith, would you call for the third reading of bill number 9223, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the third and final reading of bill number 9223 and its subsequent adoption.
Second.
Bill 9223, third and final reading. An ordinance approving an agreement with St. Louis County, Missouri regarding the placement of license plate recognition cameras within the rights of way maintained by St. Louis County within the city of Webster Groves, Missouri.
Are there questions or comments? Let's just keep voting then.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson.
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
All right, we're going to continue on to new business. Those of you who are following the agenda will see that resolution 2023-15 is listed on the agenda. We agreed during the work session that we're going to postpone that. We need some input from the Sustainability and Green Space Commissions before we make any decisions there, but we will come back now to our Director of Finance and Assistant City Manager, Mr. Peterson, and you can do the budget first. You can finish up the quarterly, whatever your preference is.
I think it's probably safest to go back to the quarterly if we can, Jenny. We'll start there. And so members, I did drop off your budget performance reports. And for those online, you can see that at home. You can see that online at webstergrovesmo.gov/budget. On the expenditure highlights for this year to date, fiscal year 23. We do have electricity, which is surging ahead of our budgeted where we were last year by 17,000, not unsurprising with rate increases and such that have happened. Usage is up. We're at 82% of the budget as of early this year. Natural gas is much the same. Now, there is a Spire increase of 7% that was approved by the state. So we are feeling that pinch as well as consumers of natural gas, but our natural gas is over budget at this point already. And that's with a mild winter. And so we are, looking obviously at a budget implication there with natural gas, 19,000 ahead of where we were last year. Fire overtime, I did want to bring this up as we look at this every quarter. We're at 89% of the budget. This is in early April, estimated with that on trend to be about 66K over. Now that does not take into account any of the changes, and that has not looked at a trend including the last payroll. So this number was formulated early on after the March 7th action that changed the staffing requirement. Police overtime is over this budget cycle as well this year. They're at 115% of budget expended year to date. Also expected to be about 66K over this year if they follow the same trends. Again, this is a trend analysis that's being used. So if factors do come in, obviously that can change that outcome.
And is this the same as last quarter where this is kind of offset by a decrease in regular police payroll?
So we certainly see a decrease there. However, it does look like by the estimates that the police department entered that they're going to be a little bit over budget for 23.
Okay, thank you.
So I wanted to talk about deficit reduction. We all know about deficit reduction, certainly up on the dais, and those of us who have been involved in it. We have a continued goal of $316,491.64 to reduce the budget in FY23 by the end of this period. Reason I bring this up is, again, you look at the estimate for where we will end this year. Now, there are some one-time revenues that we've talked about that are involved in this and improving our revenue streams to 19.3 million. But our expenditures are only $4,700 estimated to be over budget this year. So that's very good considering how much trimming we've been doing. I posed the question about deficit reduction with the question because this ties to the budget. If we go through this deficit reduction process and we talk about the budget and a longer conversation about this, does it bear fruit to make this cut now, looking ahead to the next year? It certainly, there are pros and cons of that either way. So I just want to bring that up. I want to plant that seed because it ties into the budget going forward as we only have 2 months left of real expenditures here, in the fiscal year, 2.5, I should say. So again, this is the deficit reduction policy. You all have seen this, the lapse of $1 million and then the zero growth rate. We're going to talk about that when we talk about the budget, and then essentially a 3-year plan to close the structural deficit. That is our number. We have cut $683,508.36 from the 23 budget to date. Now that some of that has been restored back into the budget in other areas, obviously, as other spending items have come in. Where does that leave us on the 5-year plan? I did provide each of you the big printout. I think you should have it at your tables and at your desks. I did want to highlight that certainly our fund balance has improved. Those one-time funds will help replenish that fund balance. We are looking at with our deficit reduction plan as far as we've gone now and these one-time revenues closing this year almost close to 11 million in 23. So that's very good. But obviously, as you can see, when you look at these numbers, if we even hold the line with these one-time expenditures in the blue section, we're still in a deficit going forward into next year. And as we talk about the budget coming up, we're going to be talking about a deficit. So this again gets back to that conversation. Are we going to try to hold that zero growth budget? And what do we want to do strategically as a city?
But that's in comparison to the 2 million we was looking at.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, there's no doubt that it has improved greatly. If you look down to the deficit reduction, if we do hold the line down on the bottom of the orange section, I'm sorry, folks in the room, you probably can't see it too well. But the orange section down on the bottom, we're actually looking, if we hold that deficit reduction, come on. We're in a surplus until FY27 if we were to hold that line. Now that line comes with pain, strategic pain as well. So it's not an easy thing to accomplish, but the point is that it obviously, pulls that deficit farther out, right? But again, we're still fundamentally, this is built on average growth rates, informing how we will look in the future.
When you say stick to the plan, you mean we need to implement the additional 300 and some odd, or?
Both. So you would be implementing the additional 319 and holding growth in the 24 budget to the 23 amount, which
Yes,
is about
okay.
$650,000 of reductions that would be needed in the 24 budget.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, can you give a little bit more detail about that? So for the $1 million, and we've reduced it to 600,000 some.
Mhm.
You made a mention of there's been other costs put back in there. Can you
Yes.
talk about that just a little bit? Because
Certainly.
it's helpful, I think, for council and for people listening to know that we've certainly reduced those costs, but they're unanticipated, costs that had to go back into it.
I think council best is if you were to take your, the budget report that I gave you during the interlude and go to the bottom of page 18. You're going to see the budget amendments. We made $683,000 worth of reductions, correct? If you look in the second column all the way down at the bottom under budget amendments on the bottom of page 18, budget amendments and then expense totals, you'll see it is a reduction of 331,000. So out of 638, we put back almost half of it right back into the budget in accomplishing the compensation changes really with police and fire. And then compounding that, taking that forward as they grow again next year in what is FY24. And then the budget that we'll discuss also has other compensation plans. Again, personnel really drives the majority of our spending in the general fund as it's 77% of the cost.
And that's no more than deferred taxes and deferred income. Deferred salary.
That's correct, yes.
So I think that's important to note because as we went into this fiscal year, we knew that we had not plugged in both police and fire because we were under contract negotiations. So now that we have the fire resolution and we've successfully completed the police CBA, those costs had to be added back in.
The other thing I was gonna ask, Eric, is when I look at your spreadsheet, the one thing that I mean, that we aren't gonna have next year and any preceding year would be the ARP revenue and the tower lease agreement. I mean, those are significant
Yes.
revenue totals, and it's like,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the reason why our numbers look so good. I mean, I shouldn't say only, but a part of the reason why our numbers look so good this year.
When it comes to all funds budget, the ARP budget certainly improved our revenues and expenditures greatly. Now, we still have a pretty significant fund balance of ARP funds that, as we talk about the 24 budget, will be a part of the conversation on how does the council wish to spend that. And I do think it's, as Councilmember Smith heard with me at the NLC assembly in Washington, DC. I mean, there's a sense of urgency to get those dollars allocated because there are clawback legislation bills floating through Congress already. So that's $1.4 million, right? A one-time funding that can be used for certain fundamental things that the city wishes to do. You are right about the tower leases and was one-time agreements. That's why on this one time on the 5-year plan, again, this blue section exists, so we don't commingle those one-time revenues and expenditures with the reoccurring, and right, really gives us a truer sense of what we're facing in terms of a deficit. So they are not, we don't expect $500,000 to come in from another litigation settlement next year. Certainly could, but there's no reasonable expectation that it's going to happen. So that's up to Neil to solve that problem for us.
I'm working on it.
I do, so it's a valid point. But again, the conversation becomes this really, I think, as the doctor pointed out about the comprehensive plan as you're talking, it's really the conversation about budget has to meet the strategic plan, right? And it's growing, the decisions that need to be made about the budget grow beyond the administration because it's really the value that is behind what is the government we want and what are we willing to pay for. I do want to point out, since we're on there, council member, thank you for stopping and asking a quick question. I do want to point out, if you go to page 3, I just wanted to point out one thing so that no one accuses the council of overspending your budget. This is a finance accounting issue that we have been dickering with, and we accidentally dropped the bank charges that the city pays in your budget. You are not 300% over budget, city council. So if you look on page 3, that line item that says 794 has $37,000 worth of bank charges. Those are normal bank charges. They have since been moved to the finance department and won't show up that way. But when this was printed, we noticed that. And so we will account for them in that regard. This is an accounting change that we did make because in the past, all what we've done as a city is simply reduced the revenue, what interest income we make from our investments to count for the bank charges. We've counted those expenses as negative revenue items. But in reality, all expenditures of city dollars must be part of an appropriation. And so the city council, we felt in finance, and certainly with Dr. Peoples' blessing, that it's important that we start to account for those things, provide an estimate for appropriation that you all approve, and then so that there is transparency around those bank charges. They have been negative revenue items hidden in the revenue budget rather than the expense budget in years past.
Eric, if I could just take us back really quick to page 18, and just so I'm clear, I don't think I understood it fully. So we effectively cut over $600,000 of expenses this year, but of that $600,000 plus dollars, 331 of it had to be quote unquote reinvested into expenses for the city.
Let me say it a different way.
Yeah.
You made a series of budget amendments, one of which was a big cut of $683,508. Other amendments were increases to account for other spendings. The net outcome is not a cut of 683, but a cut of 331.
Okay.
So while we're on this slide, do we expect this number to increase between now and the end of fiscal year? Like, because there are things that we would have spent that we've cut now, or is this like the highest? Like, this is a firm number now?
So it is certainly firm in the fact that it has been made and those reductions have happened. Usually, and you have seen this often in our budgets, there's a variance at the end of the year. We find that those extra monies that we haven't spent and we sweep them back, and it, provides a little cushion. We're expecting to be probably just a little bit over budget. Again, $4,700 based on department estimates. I don't know how much money there is to sweep back out of that to move that number up. Now that, and I think the question to get to the crux of it, council member, that Dr. Peoples and I are bringing is, what is the strategic value, and do you want us to pursue going between that number and the 1 million in terms of deficit reduction?
I mean, I get the politics of not doing it now. We've got a couple months left, and that's a lot of money to try to cut in a couple months.
Yeah.
If we don't do it now, we're gonna have to do it next year. I mean, we still have to make those cuts if we want to get to where we wanted to get in that 3-year time frame.
Yes, that is correct. And I think if, we will, when we look to FY24 in the next budget, we'll talk about some of the revenue increases that we're estimating to see there and how that the expenses interplay.
Recurring revenue.
Recurring.
Okay.
So I think that's really the point that we want to make, is that the 23 cut is tied really with what do we want to do in 24. They're not separate items. When early in 23, we could view the deficit reduction of 1 million and the holding the line in 24 as sort of separate deficit reduction tools. We're at a point in time now where they're really yoked, because if we make the change now, it's really bending that arc on what happens in 24 as well.
And I think it's kind of semantics, but I'm also wondering how we think about this. Like, is that number really 683 or is it really the 313?
Yeah. We have been operating with reductions from the adopted budget, but of course the amended budget deals with things that come up, and we all knew, essentially police and fire costs were not built into the original adopted budget.
Okay, thanks.
Eric, depending on our ending, where we end up at the end of the year with the deficit budget plan, it's going to affect year 24. Would it be to some advantage to look at 24 and 25 together as a deficit plan? Because we did excellent job in the 1 million for this year. But if you look at 24, it might be what, 200 and some thousand. Should we continue our cuts? Maybe not as much to affect 25, 24, 25 and 26.
So if you look at to answer Councilmember Smith's question, if you look down at the orange bottom part of the 5-year plan there, so you'll see that we see a surplus there of 242,000. The delta right now is 650,000. If we were to hold to a zero growth, okay. So if we reduce 650 by 240, what is that? 410. That we essentially would have to shave off. That pulls us back to a break-even type of budget in 24. If we shave 410. Now 410, to give you a sense of all the different things, is going to take a combination of, in my opinion, look at some compensation changes and potentials there, and that's things we want to talk to you about. We're not asking for answers tonight nor offering any. But also then there's other things we can do. How do we maximize the use of other funds, the other fund balances we hold and move? I have certainly talked to Neil many times, like my favorite is computer software as a capital investment by the state of Missouri's, understanding. That's $200,000 in the general fund for the major pieces of software we run, those kinds of things. But that takes your agreement that we're going to use the capital fund in a way we have not used it before. We're going to talk about pension changes later tonight, not pension changes, pension buy downs of some of that liability. That's going to help save the pension fund, which opens up some of that pension fund to take more of the general employee pension cost into the pension fund, which is certainly allowed by the 2017 action that the city residents took. So I mean, those are the kinds of things that we can do, but it's going to take a combination of that and really some clarity on it and really conversations about, does that fit our strategic goal of where we want to be? And what does that mean in those future years for those funds? Moving on.
Please.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is the deficit reduction. Again, if you remember last year, you've seen this last quarter, excuse me, this chart, we held the orange line down at zero growth, which was right about where my mouse is moving right now. We've obviously moved that up to recognize some of the 24 changes that have come to be. So this again is all movable. I just want to give folks a visualization. Still better than where we are when you look at the red and the green really coming in there in a way. So our investment report, this is a highlight for all of us. I want to thank again, Mr. Donovan, his great work. You have the schedule of investments for you at your table. We have invested right now as of March 31st, $23.432 million. That is the city's savings. It's fund balances that there's a word we use, total investments and cash of 23 million. 14 million is invested. We have moved our liquidity up to capture more interest from 40% liquid, 60% illiquid, 60% being invested. I do see us moving that further up. We have no barrier by policy on that, but I do think, best practices really we can get to about 25%, perhaps 20%. We've just lived through the worst revenue time of any local government in COVID, and locking that money up in some investments to make interest income would not hinder our cash flow in any way. And I think with the ICS sweep that we have, we would be well positioned. Our yield spread, obviously, we still have some things at the very low interest rates that are just coming out of those CDs, but you can see we're getting up to 5.10%. It's even growing beyond that since we have created this report. Our weighted yield is at 3.76. I expect us to be at 5% as we look forward to the next year. So
this is great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So this is simply the report. You now have the budget in front of you. And I do believe, and you may want to comment on this, Dr. Peoples, that there will be now some smaller meetings just so that Mr. Peterson and Dr. Peoples can walk through each of us individually with the budget so that we can really understand that document. Is that?
So that's
the
correct.
plan?
You'll be receiving an email from me that I certainly hope you'll respond to. Pretty please.
Yes, you will respond.
And I'll be seeking some times, and I'm happy to meet, as you all already know, evenings, whenever it best meets, but I'm trying to do groups 2 or 3, want to really be able to dig into the budget in detail with each of you for as long as you'll spend with me and, answer your questions, but also hear from each of you individually. What are you looking for out of this budget season? Clearly, we have presented a proposed budget to you. But in terms of holding that deficit line that Mr. Peterson was talking about, when we talked about that $1 million reduction and the deficit line, which are critical and important, and I have no intention of straying from that, but at that time, we also did not have the council strategic plan. So I am really wanting some direction on how does that overlap? Where are you looking for those strategic actions for departments, for myself to be able to further that with our tactical steps that we're currently working on, because it will take funding. And so again, it's that whole priority. And then we've heard, and some of it is an overlap. We've heard from, our sustainability, our green space. I believe our traffic advisory will be bringing some recommendation forward. All of those recommendations have dollar cost to them. So please consider that as we talk about holding the line. Additionally, the simple fact is that our goods and commodities, just like in our own personal households, continue to increase in cost. So how do we balance that? And certainly we'll come to those meetings, with recommendations for that. But those are the conversations that we'll be having.
Thank you very much. And yes, we will have a collective conversation with all of us over several meetings about the full budget. So. Anything else on this for Mr. Peterson?
We do have a PowerPoint on the budget.
Oh,
That
I'm
was-
sorry. I totally, yeah.
That was the
sorry.
work session PowerPoint.
I just, in my mind, we transitioned right into it and then yes, please go right ahead.
Okay. So we'll get this up again. This is our FY 24 proposed budget for all of you at home watching along. Dr. Peoples will join me as we talk about some of the strategic items, but please do go to the webstergrovesmo.gov/budget to find the proposed budget. Also, I want to highlight Balancing Act remains open until next week, Tuesday, because obviously there are still some questions that we have not answered in the proposed budget as staff that we want the community's input on. So we encourage you to use the Balancing Act app. Just go to webstergrovesmo.gov/budget, click on the Balancing Act logo, and you will launch right in. And
Do you know how much that's been used so far? Have you had a chance to look?
our postcards really drove up a lot of, I don't have the number. I did look earlier. It was well, I think we're into triple digits. So,
Okay.
so I'm very happy about that. We did postcards to residents all throughout Webster Groves in the ad. So I was very happy about that. We did one of the not surprising question, but it's to reflect on how hard it is to budget. We got a question posed to the finance department. Who wrote this? It feels like I have to pit one department against another. And I wanted to call back the person and said, welcome to being in the budget office, because it's, we have the fundamental reality is we have a finite piece of the pie, right? And so it can only go so far. And this is part of that strategic vision conversation that we're talking about. So again, to just recap what the mayor just mentioned, May and June meetings are being held for department overviews and council deliberation on amendments. Please plan for a process like last year. We'll have the little forms for you all and such like that. And we will be scheduling small group meetings with council members to discuss your priorities and issues. The proposed budget in total, let me grab and get out of the way here. Where'd the mouse go? This mouse move so delicate. Come on. Okay, I'm just going to leave me there. So amended budget for this for 2023, the budget estimate, and then the 24 budget proposal. So revenue, this is all funds, 27.6 million, 26.7 in expenditures. It's a $937,000 surplus budget. That does not include any of the American Rescue Plan money. There is zero American Rescue Plan money programmed in this budget right now. So it is a complete decision of the council on how to use those funds.
Was it in the other ones?
It was in this budget estimate here. So you'll see it was in the amended budget. Hence why it's so much of a bigger number here in terms of expenditures and revenue, and in this budget estimate as well. But again, no ARP money has been programmed in for this year.
And when it goes in, will it go in both revenue and expense, or? No.
Revenues have all been received on that. So
Okay.
that is now, we are essentially spending the fund balance down.
Okay,
on
so
the
ARP
budget side.
is in the top number.
It is not.
Mm.
Revenue is actual revenues that come in, not the fund balance
Okay,
that's already.
it's in the fund
received.
balance. Okay.
Why is the revenue less in 2024 than 23?
In 2023, we received $2.3 million of ARP money that we don't receive in 24.
So that's included in revenue in 23, but not,
Exactly.
okay.
We received that in 23, so it's revenue. In 24, it's savings. So we already hold it, we own it, it's not revenue.
Understood. Thank you.
Looking at the general fund, our proposed budget has revenues of 19.327 million. Now you're going to see here that $724,000 improvement in revenue. We're going to talk about those line items and how we got to those numbers. But also you see the expenditures are $640,000 up. So again, some of those decisions we make in 23 driving us into what do we see in 2024. grab this out of the way. These are the fund statements. So in thousands, again, this is the simplified version of what's on page 41 and 42, which to me is the Bible of the budget, the fund statement. This tells you the fund balance. So if you look here, the general fund, we expect to open this year with 10.5 million. Should things play out the way we expect, close with 10.149 million. That is about 52% of your general fund expenditures. So barring any massive drop in revenue or major increases in expenditures, you don't need to worry about your fund balance policy kicking into effect. I do want to point out that we have gone through, as we've talked with council, and started to look at our fund balances and have pulled together some better inclinations. And I do want to point out, if you all turn to page 41, if you could with me, the fund balance, the fund statements, they look like this one. There was a printing error. There was an Excel formula got doubled up. And I want to make sure you strike, this number has been changed online, but I want to make sure your books are reflective correctly.
I'm sorry, you said page 41.
Page 41.
Mhm.
Yep. If you go on the capital column and go all the way down to the bottom two numbers under capital, the first number should be 2056. And the second number should be 2002. What does that mean? Our capital budget is going to start this year with $2 million in fund balance and is going to end this year with $2 million in fund balance.
So you said first and second. I just want to
Sorry.
make sure.
Yep, so all
Fund
the way.
balance, July,
Established fund balance July 1, 2023 is 2056.
okay.
Fund balance June 30, 2024, 2002. So again, when you look at our closing fund balance in the total, we have 22.9 million. That reflects, if you think about our cash that we talked about, the 23 million about, that we expect that to be about the total of our cash and investments, on hand as we look at the fund balances. I want to be very clear when I talk about the fund balances are not what we program in the budget. The fund balance is a great way to explain it is a checking account. If you have a dual, you and your spouse have a checking account and one partner's income goes in for housing expenses and it's $100, but they make $150. That other $50 sits there, right? It's the extra above the plan. That's a fund balance, the extra above the plan. Fund balance, because it is not programmed, is one-time money. It is simply a piece of savings that can be used. So obviously we have many funds, not just one. So we have many fund balances, 14 to be exact. Revenue. These are our revenue numbers. We do expect, the revenue to be increasing this year overall. So when we look at property taxes, we're looking at 1.421 million. $35,000 doesn't seem like a lot. That's 3%. Every odd numbered year, we go through a reassessment of the residential property. That's been our historical trend on how much we see an increase come in during those odd numbered years. So we see a very minuscule increase in the even numbered years, not the budget year, the calendar year we're in, 23. So calendar year 24 taxes will probably net out or maybe even reduce a little compared to this coming year, 23. Intergovernmental revenue is only 5,000 or more extra. This is a lot of different things: cigarette tax, motor vehicle sales, fees, and such. I do want to point out cigarette tax is falling, which for its purpose is exactly what it's supposed to do as a tax to help disincentivize cigarette smoking. And so that tobacco tax is a falling revenue stream for the city. Sales taxes are a big winner. So these numbers include the public safety sales tax, which is for 23 was in the general fund. As you can see, we budgeted 6.5. We're going to take in 6.9, and we expect a 3% growth across that sales tax. Now, I want to be very clear, that is if recession doesn't happen. This is the weirdest and hardest thing we've had to do with revenue estimates, because every sign that some economists would tell you that the recession's coming keep passing us by, right? Core inflation is remaining strong, but yet, consumer spending is still driving straight ahead. So we have, not wanting to be too optimistic, we certainly didn't want to go above 3%, but also reflect that we have been through a year of this with inflation now and have not seen those numbers drop. So now, if they do, I'll be very clear, sales tax, we live, eat, and breathe by in the general fund. If they drop, we are going to have to watch this monthly, because this is an area that would cause us to come back and have to talk about how we manage the budget.
I was just gonna ask, I know we don't have any marijuana dispensaries in Webster, so the 3% really doesn't matter here, but the countywide 3%, how does that impact sales taxes?
The countywide 3% does not impact that at all. Now, however, that's like a cigarette tax. That's above the regular sales tax.
Mhm.
So we are getting something in the pooled sales tax. The problem is we don't have access to the data to be able to discern what is that, what is marijuana and what is simply people wanting to go buy more widgets.
Yeah.
So,
The 3% goes directly to the county for whatever they want to do.
and it does not come to us. We would expect, based on industry estimates and such, probably 150,000 should we locate a dispensary here. But at this point, even if one was saying they were ready to move in, we could probably guess maybe 9 months of revenue in this year.
Understood. Thank you.
Our utility taxes, I talked about wanting to mention, our 5-year trend on these is no better than what you see right there. We have budgeted at 3.2 for some years, hoping that they would rebound and come back to where they were. They certainly have moved up, but they have gotten nowhere near that 3.2. We have built it in once again, but this is a conversation we did put in the balancing act, revenue lines. Should we be really living on that hope that we're going to get that extra $140,000, in revenue there?
Quick question.
Yep.
The utility tax, I guess we get some tax from Ameren.
Yeah, so we have 4 utility gross receipts taxes: water from Missouri American Water, gas from Spire, a gas tax, electricity tax from Ameren, and then a telephone tax on all the telephone providers. So for people's bills, when you pay a bill, you're paying a gross receipt tax to Webster Grove as well.
Do you know how that works with the solar?
Great question. I do not. I can look at it though.
Well, yeah, I mean, your bill should go down and you're in a position where Ameren is paying you. There really shouldn't be any tax to collect.
Little do you know.
Generally, the gross receipts tax, you take how many ever kilowatt hours you buy, 7% is our tax on that. So our licenses are up just about 26,000. Inspection fees and permits down by about 20,000. Seen a little lag in occupancy permits or inspections. But however, as you can see, 23 is really proving to be a big year, a good estimate there based on the trends. But again, that all depends, right? I mean, we've heard about the new building at Owen Ridge. That could move that number up in a big way if it happens in 24, if it happens in 23, if it happens at all. So some of those things are dependent on those items. Fines, we are seeing a reduction, and we felt it necessary to pull that down from last year's budget. Municipal court is expected to take in about 250,000 rather than $300,000 worth of court fines this year. And then 19,000 is parking fines on top of that. So we've budgeted 269,000. I do think it's important for you all. Certainly, we should continue having a municipal court, but it is something to look at the cost return there as overall, as we would look at financials, benefit and cost return. Charges for services at 658, slightly down by 63,000. We feel this accurately reflects ambulance charges and other charges for services. Rec fees, this is a really, again, a testament to the recreation department, up 139,000, almost $140,000 in new rec. We're going to see that hit this year. I would expect that we'll probably be over budget again, but again, a conservative estimate reflecting that, should a bad thing happen, we may not be able to get into the rec department for a couple months, pandemic resurfaces.
Will we be able to do some type of projection on the rec fees if we move forward with the new pool?
We certainly can do that, yes. Other income is a collection of many different things, but mostly your biggest increase there, the 367,000, is the interest income that we are anticipating is in the other income line. Otherwise, most of those lines are much smaller. We do, however, see the other jurisdiction line there. That is the money that is paid to us by Webster Grove School District for the school resource officers, and then also from the library for acting as their bookkeepers and fiscal agent for that little amount of money. You'll notice one major reduction, and this is in transfers, or what we call other financing sources. 85,000 is the business district transfers. So those are transfers from the business districts to the general fund. That 788 reduction is removing the both ARP that was in there last year, but then also we did cut back on some of the business district part-time hours to really more accurately track and reflect those and make sure that we're getting all those hours billed correctly and appropriately. So again, that's our revenue estimates in the nutshell. Revenue points that we wanted to bring up, local use tax is estimated at $750,000 annually. That's great news. Our trends are bearing this out. For those of you that are at home shopping online, keep at it. Shop here locally first, or shop online if you can't. Sales tax, again, 3% growth included. Property taxes, that 3% growth on the real estate taxes in line with past year's trends. The personal property tax, we did allow for some growth, but we pulled those numbers down from the estimate this year because we saw a spike, a real one-time spike with the auto sale, with the used auto prices, and also the uncertainty of what exactly is going to come out of Jeff City.
Right.
So we do expect some growth because it's unlikely that they're going to make changes in time for this budget, this tax year. But again, that's a line item looking forward and a revenue stream we'll have to watch. Utility gross receipts, again, we have budgeted at FY23 levels. These are one of the questions we'll pose to you are how do we stay there? We're unlikely to meet that. Rec fees up 139,000. And again, our interest investment strategies coming with interest back in at 479,000. That's up over $4,000 in last year's budget. So some expenditure spotlights in the current budget, or the proposed budget, excuse me. Gasoline and oil. You can see almost $40,000 more in gasoline and oil. I would not be surprised if prices continue to drive as they have, that number will be topped over in the coming budget as well. Electricity, we're 26,500 more in this year's budget, given our electrical demand. It does speak to our conversations about sustainability and solar and creating our own power generation. Natural gas, we're $12,000 more. I am willing to bet that I may have to come back with a re-estimate while we're still in this budget process to move that number up, just simply given our experience. Water and sewer, we're at 22,500 more than we were last year. Salt, this is a great savings. We had a mild winter, so we don't have to buy near as much salt. Thank you, Director Ray. So we are $65,800 down for snow and ice control. Employee compensation, I just wanted to highlight what is in the budget. So you know, there is funding for the police CBA, for the 3 collective bargaining agreements for $4 million there. There's funding for the fire department compensation plan that you have authorized at $3.7 million. And built into this budget is a 4% COLA for the general government employees. Now that again, I won't speak for Dr. Peoples. I don't know. We have not called it her recommendation. It is built in we built it in finance as a way to start these budget conversations. Certainly we'll let her speak to what she wants to see for employees, but I do want you to know what's built into this budget in those lines. So this budget is in deficit by $397,501. So we have to come up by the end of this with a way to balance that budget. There are 4 major methods to do so that are legal for us to use, or any combination of the 4. We can reduce expenditures, cuts. We can increase revenues, grow some more money. We can transfer from other revenues or move costs out of the general fund to other funds, or we can utilize fund balance. Again, there we have $10.14 million in that fund balance right now. All of that to bring us to the points to consider as we wrap this up, and things that we want you to walk home with tonight as you start to go through this and mark it up and ready to ask us questions. How do we balance the budget?
Mr. Peterson, would you go back to the last slide, please?
Sure.
While finding $400,000 is not a fun task, we have come leaps and bounds from where we were last budget year, where we were trying to balance 1.5 million. So we have plenty of options, whether it's ARP, whether it's reducing, whether it's a combination of things. But for those that are here with us this evening and they're watching online, again, I really want to applaud all the department directors and their teams for making the difficult decisions and things that they did this year. And as they really thought about their budgets and what they proposed going into FY24, we've really offered up a pretty lean proposed budget. So yeah, thank you, Ms. Peterson.
Will the directors make their presentation to the council?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And they are eager.
We didn't give them a PowerPoint, so I think they thought they were off the hook, but that's just coming up next month, so. So again, these are points we want you to consider as you head towards small group meetings with us, as you go home and do what I do and sleep and think about the budget with every waking hour. How do we balance this budget? Again, find that $400,000. What should we be doing about this zero growth and moving us towards a deficit reduction? Do we go to zero growth? Do we go to some number in between there? Myriad of options. What's your comfort level? Should we make those budget cuts in FY 23, the 319,000 or some combination thereof? What's appropriate compensation for employees? Again, we are now pretty much bound with police and fire. So we're really talking about the general government employees. How do we address some very lingering infrastructure, vehicle replacement issues, other upgrades and things here with the fund pressures we see? We have a lot of fund balance, but again, we as a city have historically liked to have a lot of money in the bank, right? Now, do we want to use that into a lot of one-time costs and make those investments? Or do we like to have that money in the bank?
Councilman Smith is over here spending the money in the bank.
Yeah, I fully aware. I will remind you also, though, that the more money of that you spend, the less money we have to make interest on. So, but what are your priorities for ARP funds? And then I did want to bring this up because we obviously have heard from many of the commissions, the pools, I'll call them the pools of money from the ARP fund, sort of designated for sustainability, business development, traffic calming and such. The manager does recommend rolling them over. The reason we didn't roll them over is, what is the amount therein? I think, as we talk about the sustainability, $100,000. I'm going to ask you all, where do you think NOMO April got paid for from? Got paid for out of that, right? So I mean, there's an ongoing need as we do these fun things. We have to have a little money for it. So that 100,000 already is a little less than 100,000, right? Work in Webster Groves has pulled down that business development fund. So we can certainly build in those estimates and help roll over those funds. But again, that's a recommendation we make as you consider the ARP funds in total. Are those again strategic priorities for you all? So I'll pause there and turn it back to you all to conversate about
One
this.
thing I'm just gonna ask here, would you mind sending the text or the two slides, this one and the one in front of it?
Sure.
To all of us, because I think this is good for us to have as we review the budget and as we come into the meeting, talk about the details so that we really understand what the decision points are.
Absolutely.
And with the ARP funds, and you mentioned, and I've even heard it just in the news, listening to politics, blah, 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 the clawbacks form, we have until what time to utilize those funds?
Barring any other federal action, the original law says we have until the end of calendar year 2024, next calendar year, to allot, meaning to appropriate the money and say, this is what it's going for. And we have until the end of calendar year 2026 to spend it.
Okay.
Now, the reason I talk about the urgency, again, there's politics in that, but it's being looked at by some folks on the Hill as we talk about the debt limit, it's a take back, right? To help make those offsets they're looking for to change the debt limit conversation.
Right.
So I'm not being partisan in any way, but those conversations, while they usually start with one party, they end up morphing along the way. And so I think those funds are there and they're available. And, we have plenty of other one-time funds that we could sit on for a while longer, I guess is my advice looking at it. So.
All right, any other questions for Eric? Thank you very much. Once again, we have a wealth of information. And I appreciate your time and putting things together for us. And I did also neglect to thank Mara for the same thing because we've learned a whole lot tonight there as well. We now move to the approval of the consent agenda. I noticed, Peterson, you sat down, but you might as well pop right back up. I don't think anyone wants to necessarily remove in terms of voting, but there were a couple of discussion points. Councilwoman Hickson, would you like to?
Could you just give us a really brief summary of the sponsorship policy? And if there are I guess one of my questions is, if there are not established events that want to approach being sponsored by the city, what's the route for that?
Sure.
I'm assuming it's a border commission, but I just wanted to kind of see what you said.
So, first of all, the greatest joke of the night, you asked me to be brief, so I will work at it. There is no current established policy for events and sponsorships. And we really saw when Dr. Peoples and I came, a great conversation with Mara and others about these commissions that, will sponsor an event. And that means then that the city is providing in-kind services. Parks and Rec is dropping off trash cans for free. We're putting out no parking signs and barricades for free, sometimes providing police overtime for free. That was really meant to be limited by the word of mouth at 2 events. For some commissions, it was 1 event per year, but there was no written policy to that regard, nor any way for really to have that communicated that this is the event. And not to pick on the Arts Commission, I don't want to, they are a great amount of people, but we had a conversation there where there was like 4 events that they wanted sponsored. And that, we're really like, that's really 2, right? And one of them was a very big community event, Webster Arts Fair. It's certainly something that we as a community want to support. So that's the impetus of where this comes from. Really, what it's an attempt to do is really give the guidance to the boards and commissions and to council that you as well can sponsor and say, this is an important event to the community. That is not our event. That is an event, somebody else's event we want to sponsor. And really, it's really a matter of, if it's the council or the commission and such, taking an action to say, we're sponsoring this event, it's communicated up. Almost all these events, with the exception of block parties, are special activity permits, which come through my office. So you think of the July 4th Carnival, the Lions put on, the Webster Arts Fair, WOW, Dave Buck's WOW, the Baroque event, all those have a special activity permit because they are institutions and organizations using the land essentially in a way not originally intended for that purpose of an event. So now this people, John Q. Citizen wants to rent Gazebo Park for a little birthday park, they go to Parks and Rec, handle that themselves. That's all that regard. This is really about institutions and how the city provides in-kind services and to what limit. So we don't just continually run overtime and other costs out for that. So that's really the crux behind it. I would just add that one thing that we did add is that last article on page 6, non-event sponsorship. Really, this conversation, we have a lot of different places where we provide funding to an organization. And it's really, you see that really in the business districts in a big way. The old Webster Trade Association, we subsidize a large amount of their work. We do that without any written agreement between those organizations. And sometimes we have organizations that aren't even a registered entity, as a trade association, as a nonprofit, whatever it may be, and that we're providing money to. And so those one-off things, not a big deal, but if we're in a repeat cycle of that kind of support, we really should have an intergovernmental or a memorandum of understanding about what we expect as partners in this from both perspectives.
And when we talk about limits, the limits are on like the types of things that we'll kind of cover as opposed to the number of events we'll do. Is that how I read it?
Right. So if Green Space sponsors 2 events, those events, whatever they may be and what they need in terms of parking barricades, issues with the parks, if any police services are necessary, we would provide them as in-kind, meaning we do not charge that organizing entity to pay for them. To give you a sense, the Shamo Run, the Jim Shamo Run that's going to come up in May, they pay us as the city as an event they pay the police officers for their overtime, they pay us for the city for no parking, for barricades and such like that, because they are not a sponsored event. Does that help answer your question?
But we don't have a limit on the number of sponsored events that we're willing.
We do under this. So each commission would be allowed 2.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councilwoman Hickson Shepherd, I think maybe the piece that may be missing is that's not very different from what the informal policy was. So now we're just trying to codify it.
And so if there's a new event in the future that wants to be one of those, they would start with the appropriate board of commission, and that board of commission would need to make a choice on if that's going to replace one of their other 2 or how that works.
Yes, ma'am.
And we did include allowing the city manager to say, okay, this is an overwhelming community event, right, that we really want to support. Lions Club Carnival is a great example of that, right? I mean, we meet with them as the management team and all the rest of the staff to really say, let's make sure to provide this for the community.
It's over. Thank you.
The fire chief has rung the bell.
I need to go.
Kind of slide.
That's 3 minutes.
I'm more than good. I'm totally good. Yeah, I'm more than good.
I'm gonna not use brief. I'm gonna say take a quick minute, and I mean a minute, to tell us about the other item that's in the consent agenda
Certainly.
about pension.
Police and fire pensions are covered under the Police and Fire Pension Fund. We will in the budget come with a recommendation to rename that fund because other employees are utilize that fund as well. But the reality of this is we have $1.8 to $1.9 million in our fund balance in the pension fund. Pensions are going to go up for fire by police by 9.9%. And they're going to go up for fire by 0.6% this year, meaning our liability is growing. Therefore, our annual cost is going to go up. We can make a one-time payment into each of those accounts respectively. I think it's 560 is the total to drive that back down, that payment back down to where it was in FY 23. Thereby relieves that pension fund pressure. And should we desire, if we talk about moving things around from funds, does leave some capacity to move more general fund employee pension into the pension fund and off the general fund, should we want to make that move. It is, I just want to be very clear, it does not change anyone's pension plan benefit in any way, shape, or form.
Great, thank you very much. Council Member Richardson, could you call for the approval of consent agenda, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Thank you. We have reappointed Ed Scholl to the library board. And I believe that brings us to the end of business for today. There is no closed session. So thank you. We made it before 9 o'clock. I'm just going to note that. for the record. Thank
That
you.
has to be in the
Thank
minutes.
you.